Good evening, friends. If we could take our seats. Friends, if we can take our seats, we'll get the evening started. Welcome to Washington National Cathedral. Welcome to all of you who are seated here in the nave, and welcome to all of you who are joining us by way of the internet. We are honored to have all of you here with us tonight. Thank you for being with us. My name's Randy Hollerith. I am the Dean of the Cathedral, and it is an honor and a joy for us to host this program tonight, this very important program. My thanks to Governor Cox and to Governor Moore and to all our panelists for being with us tonight. As we head deeper into this election year, I can think of few topics more important than civility and the need for civil discourse in order for our democracy to thrive. At the Cathedral this year, virtually all of our programming is designed to call Americans to the better angels of their nature, as Lincoln said, to promote civility, to lift up the values of compassion and humility, forgiveness and love, and to remind people that even our worst enemies, political or otherwise, are the beloved children of God and should be treated as such. I want to thank tonight some very important people. Especially I want to thank our sponsor, Deseret Magazine. And to let you all know, there are 700 copies of the most recent edition of Deseret Magazine in the back of the Cathedral, which you are welcome to take with you. And that edition is on this subject of civility. So I hope you will take one with you. And we're very grateful to Deseret for their support. And I want to thank Wesley Theological Seminary and the Wheatley Institute at Brigham Young University for partnering with the Cathedral to bring you this program. But especially I want to thank my partners who have been working on and dreaming about tonight for many months. Judge Thomas Griffith, the Reverend Dr. David McAllister Wilson, and Dr. Gregory Prince. We are here tonight because of their extraordinary efforts. Please join with me in thanking them for putting this on. And finally, I want to thank perhaps the most important person here tonight, the Director of Programming here at the Cathedral, Ms. Margaret Rawls, for her leadership, hard work, and for holding all of this together tonight. Margaret, God bless you. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Judge Griffith, who will introduce our keynote speakers.
Thank you, Dean Hollerith. It's my honor to introduce to you this evening Governor Spencer Cox of Utah and Governor Wes Moore of Maryland. Spencer Cox is the 18th governor of Utah and is currently chairman of the National Governors Association and the driving force behind its initiative called Disagree Better, Healthy Conflict for Better Policy. Governor Cox describes himself as a husband, a father, a farmer, and a recovering attorney. He attended Snow College and Utah State University in Utah and the law school at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. Before being elected governor in 2020, he served as Utah's lieutenant governor and was a city council member, a mayor, a county commissioner, and a state legislator. Governor Cox and his wife Abby are the parents of 4 children. Wes Moore is the 63rd governor of Maryland. He's the first black governor in the state's 246-year history, and just the 3rd African-American elected governor in the history of the United States. Governor Moore is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and the University of Oxford, where he studied at Wolfson College as a Rhodes Scholar. Before running for office, Governor Moore built a small business that helped underserved students navigate college. He led Soldiers in Combat in Afghanistan and wrote a series of best-selling books exploring race and opportunity in America. Governor Moore and his wife, Donna, are the parents of 2 children, Governor Cox and Governor Moore.
Wow. Are these on? Test, test. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, I think we're on. What a crowd.
This is what a location too.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
I have to say, look, I have a few rules in life. One of them is never have your biography read next to the biography of Wes Moore. He's jumping out of planes. He's writing books, and I'm like, yeah, I grew up on a farm in Utah. But here we are, Governor. It's great to be here with you. First of all, let me just start by thanking Dean Hollerith and everyone at the Washington National Cathedral. This is just a sacred place. I never thought, I'm sure growing up, that either of us would be here in this moment having this conversation. And thanks to all of you who have given up your Wednesday night to be here with us. This is really impressive. We're just going to have a discussion for a little while, just back and forth. We get to interview each other and ask each other questions. And so I'm going to start, if that's okay.
I love it.
I have the microphone here. Look, friend, this topic of disagree better is something I'm passionate about. I chose it as the chair of the National Governors Association as the initiative. I'm really worried about our country and where we are today. I asked my fellow governors to help and to participate in this initiative, and you jumped in with both feet. And I know I've talked to you about it, but I'd love for you to share with everybody here tonight why you think this topic matters in our country today.
Yeah, and first, this is absolutely gorgeous. And so it is wonderful to see each and every one of you, and this really is an honor. And I'm going to be very honest. First, one of the really important reasons why I said yes and jumped in with both feet is because my friend asked. I believe in Spencer Cox. And, I can tell you that the first time I got a chance to meet him was the NGA hosts something which is affectionately known as Baby Governor School. For all the baby governors, all the new governors that come on board. I was saying earlier, and it's true, I remember when I came back from baby governor school, my mother asked me, she's like, so what grade did you get? I was like, it doesn't have a grade, Ma. But one of the first people to reach out to me, one of the first people to embrace me, a person who's repeatedly reached out, checking on me, how are things going, how can I help? It's Governor Cox and him and his wonderful family. And so first, I just knew I was going to say yes because my friend asked. I think the second thing is I believe in this mission. I believe in the idea that we don't have to come all to the same conclusion, but everyone just wants to be heard. Everyone wants to feel like they were part of a larger process. And, and I mentioned it, I don't come from a political background. I don't come from a political family. This was the first office I ever ran for. I was saying I actually had to convince members of my family to vote for me. And it's not because my family and I aren't cool. We're very cool. It's because many members of my family had never voted. So we don't come from that culture. So the other thing that we don't come from is a natural disposition to hate someone because of their political party. We don't have that. And I don't believe, you can't claim to love the country if you hate half of the people in it. And so the idea of disagree better, the idea of being able to say, we actually have an opportunity to have genuine debates and disagreements, that we're not gonna, there are things that we fundamentally disagree on, and that's okay. Yet at the same time, how we do it, how we engage, how we choose to work together, that matters. Because it still comes down to, do you see and understand the humanity of the person that is sitting next to you? If you can honor that, then you're honoring the will of the people who elected you to be there in the first place. So actually, I think this whole idea of disagree better, and the reason why I was so excited to do it. I just believe it's the most democratic topic that we can take on in this moment. And it's a question out for you, because I'm curious why you chose this as a topic, because a lot of governors, when they come and they take over the NGA, they'll choose infrastructure, or they'll choose broadband, or they'll choose education, and you chose disagree better. Why?
Well, thank you for your help in this initiative, and I feel the same way about you. And look, I'm actually in cycle, so I'm up for re-election this year. He's not, so it's you're much more comfortable right now than I am. I can just tell you that. And that's one of the reasons I chose this. This is really to answer the question. Stuff like this has historically been pretty common. A Republican and a Democrat on stage together, having a conversation, being friends. And there are so many people in our country right now, in my party and in your party, that would criticize us for even doing this. How could you have a conversation with that person or those people? Those people hate us. Those people are destroying our country. And that's what I keep hearing over and over again. And it's, I grew up in a family that was a little different than yours. I grew up in a small town. I grew up very poor. We had nothing when I was growing up. We have some things in common that way. But when I was 8 years old, my dad became the mayor of my small town. And I share that because, by the way, everybody's dad became the mayor of our small town. That's how small our town was. So this is, but we didn't talk about politics in my family either, even though my dad was the mayor. I did not know who was a Republican in my town, and I did not know who was a Democrat in my town. And when we moved back to my town, after becoming an attorney and deciding I wanted to move home and raise my kids, I want to give a shout out to my amazing wife, who we went to high school together, and she grew up in a small town, and my daughter who's here. So we go back to raise our kids on the farm where we grew up and run the telecommunications company, and I still didn't know who the Republicans and Democrats were in my town. And then something started to change. It started to change about 12 years ago, 15 years ago, and then it just got worse and worse and worse. And people started defining themselves by their party affiliation. And I saw it in religion. Politics was becoming religion for many people, and then politics infiltrated their religion, and you started to see that more and more. And I just hated that that's how we were seeing each other. And so, look, when I ran for governor the last time, a friend of mine came to me, and it was again, we're in the presidential cycle in Utah. We're the weird state where we run on the same cycle, and so this was I was getting ready for my election in November. This is late September, early October, and his friend said, "I'm really worried about our country right now. I'm worried what's going to happen with this presidential election." She said, "I'm worried if Trump wins again, the left is going to burn it down," and she said, "I'm worried that if Biden wins, the right is going to shoot it up, right? And she said something bad is going to happen." She said, "Can't you do something about it?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm just running for governor of Utah." And I couldn't sleep that night, and we talked about it and had this crazy idea that my opponent and I would film an ad together. So I called my opponent, Democrat Chris Peterson, great guy. And it's really weird when your opponent calls you, because we don't do that. We have people to do that. They talk to each other. So I call him up and I said, hey, I have this crazy idea. What if we filmed an ad together? And he's like, what's the catch? I'm like, no catch. You know, it'll just be, I'm Spencer Cox, and I think you should vote for me. And you say, I'm Chris Peterson, and I think you should vote for me. And while we disagree on lots of things, we both agree that we love our state and we love our country, and we'll accept the results of the election, whatever they end up being. And really simple stuff that we all used to believe in. And he agreed to do it, and we did it, and it went viral in a way that was unexpected, and we found out Stanford ran an experiment with that ad and found out that it had a depolarizing effect. So all of that was weighing on me, and I thought, they just told us, the experts told us, that we need people in elected office to model this behavior again, this behavior that used to be so normal in our country and is no longer normal. Yeah. And that's why I chose to do it. And I'm grateful that there are people like you who are willing to get on stage with someone like me and show America that we don't have to hate each other, that we don't have to treat each other with contempt. That's and right. Anyway, I'm just proud of the work you're doing. So thank you. So, by the way, we've been filming these ads. Some of you may have seen them with my fellow governors. You filmed an ad recently. Yeah. You have to. The catch is we'll pay for the ad. We'll put it together, but you have to film the ad with someone from the other party, someone who is different than you. And you did it with the mayor. Can you tell everybody how that went down? Kind of. I mean, before you filmed the ad, how you got to know this guy and how you chose him.
It was great because I filmed my shoot with the mayor of Lonaconing, which is in far western Maryland. It's a town in western Maryland. And the way I first got to know him was in my first days of governor, the town of Lonaconing was having a water crisis. So they were having a boil water advisory. And so the first trip that I took as the governor of the state of Maryland was going out to western Maryland and to go figure out how we could help this town out in western Maryland. And so when I first got a chance to meet the mayor, he comes up and he's like, you know, Governor, and he introduced himself, and he said, can you do me a favor? He said, turn 360 degrees. So I turned 360 degrees, and he said, the only guarantee I can give you is you didn't see a Democrat within 5 miles of anywhere you just looked. And he said, but I'll tell you what, you're the first governor that's been here since 1996. 96. And we actually built this really beautiful friendship. And Mayor Coburn, who I now probably speak with almost every other week now at this point, really showed me something. And he showed me the importance of presence, of showing up, of being willing to engage, of being there when people are both in need, and even being there when they're not. But just knowing that even if I know I might not get your vote or might not get your support, I'm gonna keep showing up. And I think this became a really important thing because I think it highlighted something that I saw when I think about my political philosophy where, you know, when I first ran for office, I had people who I served with in Afghanistan. I was a member of the 82nd Airborne Division. And as a member of the 82nd, we deployed overseas. And I remember I had people who I served with overseas who came and door knocked on my behalf. Many of the people that came and door knocked on my behalf, they were not Marylanders. Many of the people that came and door knocked on my behalf, they were not Democrats. But they just simply came to knock on doors and were just saying to the people who they met, let me tell you about the guy that I served with. Sometimes you just got to show up. And I think that there is a real power to it where, you know, and it's not just for people who sit in positions of elected office or authority, where they spend time speaking to echo chambers. And they will only go have conversations with people who are going to tell them what they want to hear. And the best ideas are actually in the tough. The best concepts, the best policies, those are actually the times and the places when you're being forced to outreach. You're being forced to engage. You're being forced to have tough conversations. But in that, that's the glory. That's the good stuff. That's what you're hoping for, because that's a place when you're actually pulling things together that really do a better job of honoring. And so when you said, is there somebody who you'd want to pick? The first person that came to my mind was my Republican friend, who happens to be the mayor of Lonakoning, who I am so thankful for the leadership that he shows, and also for the way that he helped to shape my leadership as the chief executive of the state. And and I think about it where you've modeled a lot of this, not just in terms of the work you've done with the NGA, but also the work that you've done in Utah. Are there examples, policy issues, things you've gotten past where it really took kind of like that modeling of bringing people on board? Because we're actually in very similar situations where you don't need a single Democratic vote in order to get something passed in Utah. I could pass my entire agenda with just Democrats if I chose to. We haven't. Every bill that we've introduced, and we've now actually gone, in our first session went 10 for 10, and we got 10 for 10 bipartisan. We got Democrat and Republican support on all of our bills. But we didn't have to. You don't have to. How do you think about your philosophy, and is there a bill or a policy that you're really proud of that you're able to get done?
Yeah, thank you. Look, you're right, we don't have to. We have a supermajority of Republicans in the state, and never have to work with the Democrat to pass a bill. And this is where I think it's really important. Sometimes political outcomes are binary. Sometimes they're, your bill passes or it doesn't. You win or you lose. Now, we try to reject that zero-sum thinking as much as possible, but process really matters. Making sure people feel like they have an opportunity to be heard, right? That the process is fair. If the process is fair, even if you lose, you're much more likely to accept the result. But going above and beyond that, just that realization, that very adult realization that everyone needs a place at the table. We live in a pluralistic society. And so we've worked on several big issues, and it's always fascinating to me. I'll give you just two quick examples last year. We had a very controversial bill that passed around transgender youth and health care. Right? We made some changes to that bill that I think were very important because of the listening sessions we had with transgender youth and their parents. That being said, they were still very upset with the bill. And that bill got an enormous amount of attention. It was every newspaper, every online, everybody wrote about that bill and how divisive it was. In the very same session, this very same supermajority of the legislature, they were working on a bill around conversion therapy, okay? So the LGBTQ community impacted by this, I won't go into all the history, but we had a bill before that had failed, and the governor before me had actually used some executive authority to end conversion therapy in Utah. We had two very conservative legislators who were introduced a bill to bring conversion therapy back, okay? Incredibly divisive and a lot of hostility and anger. Now, to their credit, they sat down with Equality Utah, which is the LGBTQ advocacy group in Utah, and they basically locked themselves in a room and said, we are going to figure this out. And they committed to each other. They had enough faith in each other, enough trust in each other to have that conversation. My team was involved. We were talking to them as well. And they got to this beautiful place where they finally understood each other, because they took that leap of faith that's so rare today. They come out of that room with a new bill that bans permanently conversion therapy in the state of Utah, and it passes unanimously. It passes unanimously. The only conversion therapy bill in the United States to ever pass a legislative body unanimously. And at the signing of this bill, as I signed it, we had Equality Utah and the Eagle Forum, ultra-conservative, social conservative group, standing next to each other as we signed this bill together. It was a very special day, and none of you know about it. None of you know about it because nobody covered it. nobody cared. They didn't spill a lick of ink. Now, a couple of our local papers covered it. I want to be very fair. Deseret magazine covered it, and Deseret newspaper. Thank you, our sponsors tonight. But that's my point. Again, that's something I'm very proud of, something that we worked really hard to do, and something that I think has really made our state a better place. And as we're looking for these opportunities, real examples of ways that we can do things better and work together, as governors, we have to do stuff. Governor Moore says this all the time. We actually have to get stuff done. Frank Luntz called the governors the last adults in the room in politics. We steal ideas from each other. We're still laboratories of democracy. I'm really proud that Utah leads the nation in service, in volunteerism and charitable giving every year. It's something that I think makes our state better. I think it makes us less polarized. All of that being said, this guy one-upped me and has done some incredible things around service. I want you to talk about those if you would, and how you think service and volunteerism plays a role in helping us in what we're trying to accomplish to depolarize our nation. Yeah, no,
thank you, and it's true, because Utah actually was a prime example that we looked at and modeled this work after. And we campaigned on this idea that we wanted to make Maryland the first state in the country that provides a service opportunity for our students. And I remember after we ended up winning the election, people said, they're like, listen, it's a great idea. Maybe you should focus on it in your second term. After you get a couple wins under your belt, take your time. And we said, okay, appreciate the guidance. And we went and got it done in the first 90 days. And we passed legislation that now makes Maryland the first state in the country that offers a service year option to every single one of our high school graduates. And there's a few different reasons. And we're excited. We have hundreds of these students who are all over the state right now. And they're working in serving older adults. They're working to protect the environment. They're helping returning citizens. They're helping young people. They're finding anything that makes their heart beat a little bit faster and know that we're going to help them to find their passion and fulfill it. And there's a few big reasons why we were working to prioritize it. One is I'm a big believer in experiential learning. And particularly for our young people, if you give them an opportunity to find that thing that can help to explore their interests and give them a pathway to do it, it's not just going to change them, it'll change the trajectory of their family. Second reason, we're big believers in earned financial cushions. That if young people are doing something and they're doing good work, you need to make sure that you're compensating them for it, because if you do not do that, that's where you get that disparity between those who can serve and those who can't. The third piece is this has been one of the greatest workforce development training tools that we have. Some of the first people that signed up to say we'll take people have been the private sector, because they say this is great workforce development and for us to create a pipeline for our employees. But the fourth reason, it's because service is sticky. And those who serve together will stay together. And in this time of political divisiveness and political vitriol, and where people seem to care more about where the idea come from than is it a good idea, I believe that service will save us. Service will save our society. Because if we can be a state that gets to know each other again, if we can be a state that serves together, if we can be a state where people find an opportunity to explore different parts of the state that they did not know about, or meet people that they would have never had the opportunity to get to know, it'll change their perspective about what is their contribution and what is the potential contribution of the person on the other side of town. And we have been so blessed to watch how that impact has already worked. We've now just introduced legislation where we're doubling the amount of people in this next year, in this year's budget that we had from last year. This is going to grow. And while Maryland is the first state in the country to do this, I guarantee you, Maryland will not be the last. And we're just incredibly proud of the young people who have just raised their hands to serve, because they're going to be the ones that will save us, especially in this moment. And I tell you, I mean, there's another thing that I'm I'm proud that you all have done and have served a real model for us is anyone who has followed our administration knows I am obsessed with ending child poverty. I think there is no reason in a society like ours that we allow child poverty, that we allow children and their destinies to be determined before they even have a say. And so we have been very aggressive in our state to be able to address the issue of child poverty. First came on board, raise the minimum wage to $15 because gone should be the days when we have people who are working jobs, in some cases multiple jobs and still living at or below a poverty line, made permanent a child tax credit, have an enhanced earned income tax credit, focus on education. So we are moving, and there's actually a bill we're working on this year called the Enough Act. And Enough actually stands for engaging neighborhoods, organizations, unions, governments, and households. So, i.e., la-di-da-di everybody. And it'll be the first kind of its first of it in the nation attempt to catalyze private, philanthropic, and state dollars to be able to have a full frontal attack on concentrated and generational child poverty in our state. We are going to end this in the state of Maryland. But the reason I bring that up is this. Do you know who is the best in the country at dealing with child poverty? Utah. Utah has the lowest child poverty rates in the entire country. And so yes. Which I have to say something says a whole lot about the humanity. Because no humane society allows children to live in poverty. Period and full stop. How did you all do it? And what can every other governor in this country learn about how to address an issue that I am fully committed to making sure that we fix here in the state of Maryland?
Well, thank you for those kind words. And back to the service thing, he said that they're the first and they won't be the last. He's right, because I've got a bill copying what they're doing in Maryland right now. So we're working on that together. Look, I believe that all of this that we're talking about, really in the child poverty piece specifically, it comes back to community. It really does. Again, I'm not going to give my dissertation on Alexis de Tocqueville right now. You can stay after. That's for the after party, everybody. I know you're really excited about that. But what he saw when he came to the United States in the 1830s, he saw community that came together when there was a problem, that worked together, not always relying on government. And what you're doing, and I do think that this is the answer, it can't be just a government solution. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to build institutions and community institutions. And we are so fortunate to have amazing nonprofits and a very strong faith-based community. Of course, we have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but that's not all. We have amazing faith-based partners. The Catholic Church in Utah is unbelievably strong, and the work they're doing with our refugees, and again, the work to end child poverty. So our faith-based community is fully engaged. And probably the thing I'm maybe most proud of is that we have a incredibly generous philanthropic community. It's a cultural thing. It really is a cultural thing, an ethos that people are expected to give back. Just a quick story. A friend of mine was talking to a CEO of one of the largest companies in America. I won't say their name, but they were in another state. They were so proud. They had just done this giant fundraiser where they had brought in the philanthropic community together, and he was bragging that they had raised $4 million for charity, for these different charities. And this friend of mine kind of smiled, and he said, "You realize we just raised $300 million for a children's hospital in Utah, all private funding." The Miller family donated $50 million and challenged the other billionaire families and philanthropic families to match that. And they raised $300 million to do that. Now, it doesn't just happen with the billionaires. It happens with everyone. The widow's mite is a real thing, and we value that just as much. I tell companies when they relocate to Utah, and we give them a tax incentive to do that, a post-performance tax incentive, I say this: look, we're excited. We want you to come to Utah, but you need to know something. If you're coming here, you have a duty to give back, and we expect you to give back. In fact, I released an executive order just last year that requires every company who gets a tax incentive in Utah, they're required now to give volunteer hours in their community if they want that tax incentive. They have to give back. For the very reasons that you mentioned, we know that that builds community, it solves problems, and it depolarizes our country. Okay, I get the last question because we're just about out of time. Look, this has been fun. We've spent the day together. We've been able to do some things together. I had a really controversial, difficult bill that came recently that we've worked through. Had to do with DEI, a topic that's, again, the culture wars are kind of raging in America today. And I had a friend who came up to me. She's black. We've been friends for a long time. She disagreed with what was happening. And she came up to me and she gave me a hug and she said, "I'm mad at you and I love you. And can we talk? I want you to read some things. Will you read some things?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Will you read some things?" And she said, "Yeah." And we have this friendship that allows us to do that. So the last question I have for you is, look, this is great. There are some people out there rolling their eyes at us right now. Like, how can you talk about this in today's environment? Like, those people on the other side are nuts. They're crazy. They're trying to destroy our country. Just in practical terms, when you meet someone like that, someone not just from the other party, but from the extremes who just, how do you do this work? How do you do it? It's one thing to say it on stage. It's another thing when someone's in your face and really upset. You get the closing word. I'm giving you the last word today. Anything you want to say to this amazing group? How do we take this from the stage and how do we take it home with us?
You know, the thing that I always think about is never forget who put us here in the first place. You know, I think about what it took for us to be able to ascend to these seats. The people who believe in us. The people who were willing to go knock on doors. The people who were willing to give up their evenings to go campaign on our behalf. The people who were just hoping that when we got to those seats that we didn't forget them and forget the things that we were campaigning on and talking about. And one thing, and again, you know, I'm not naive to the point where you're not going to convince everybody of everything. And that's okay. But the thing I never want people to ever be able to say about me or my time here is that we didn't listen. And we didn't understand the assignment. And you know, I was mentioning earlier that I remember on the morning of my inauguration, we actually started the inauguration down at the Annapolis docks, which is in the Capitol, Maryland State Capitol. And we started down at the docks for a very specific reason, because not only is it beautiful, and I hope you all go and stay at hotels down there and eat. But we started down there intentionally because the Annapolis docks were also one of the first and largest slave ports in this country's history. In fact, if you go down there, you'll see a tribute to Alex Haley and Kunta Kinte, the story of Roots. That was Annapolis. And we actually did a wreath-laying ceremony down there. And we said a prayer to the ancestors. And then we marched. About 200-300 of us marched. And people of all backgrounds all marched up to the State House. A State House which, by the way, was built by the hands of enslaved people. And it was in front of that State House that I was then inaugurated as the 63rd governor of the state and the first black governor in the history of the state of Maryland. But we did it for a reason. We did it not just because, and it was interesting because, you know, I remember literally that night before, you know, some of the first coverage was, oh, he's beginning his administration with indoctrination. It wasn't indoctrination, it was history. and its importance of understanding your history. But the power of the history was this. It wasn't just the history of a group. It was the history of all of us. It was the history of our state. It's the history of our country. It's the history of our communities. And so the thing that I always try to think about is, in these difficult conversations and in these difficult times, where people seem to, where in the words of Kipling, when everyone is losing their heads and blaming it on you. That's actually the time that we hold on to our history closest. That's the time when we remember the path that got us here in the first place. That's the time when we remember the trials and tribulations that our society has gone through. And frankly, it helps us to understand that these moments that we find ourselves in, no matter how complicated they are, we've seen complicated before. And still I rise. And so in this time, in this moment, if we never forget where we came from, if we never forget the shoulders we stand on, and if we never forget who it is that we're fighting for, then I think we'll never stop fighting. And even the most frustrating moments in the work are still joyful moments in the work, because it means we understand the assignment.
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Wes Moore. Thank you, my friend.
And Governor Timmy Cox.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We're going to move on to the next portion of our program. We're going to invite the members of the panel to come up. Thank you so much for that warm ovation for Governor Moore, just an incredible human being, and I'm glad we got to spend some time with him tonight. Now, I'm very excited about this next panel. You're going to meet some just incredible Americans who are doing really important work in this space. By the way, I just have to thank Judge Thomas Griffith for his amazing just leadership and kindness. He's unbelievable. Thank you, Tom. If you're wondering what all of us have in common, it's that we know Judge Griffith, and when he asks you to do something, you just say yes, and then we fill up an entire cathedral full of people because of that. So I'm very pleased to introduce our four remarkable panelists this evening, each with incredibly unique qualifications to speak on this topic. So first of all, on your far right, we have Dr. Timothy Shriver. He's an educator and chairman of the Special Olympics International Board of Directors. He's also the founder of Unite, an initiative to promote national unity and solidarity across differences. And I'm proud to call him a friend. Please join me in welcoming Tim. Thank you. Next to him, we have Ruth Okediji. She is the Jeremiah Smith Jr. Professor of Law at Harvard Law School and co-director of the Berkman Klein Center. Professor Okediji has advised intergovernmental organizations, regional economic communities, and national governments on a range of matters related to technology, innovation, policy, and development. Please give her a round of applause. Thank you. And hopefully I'm not missing, I'm not. The rest of it is here. Rachel Brand, who is here with us. Walmart's Executive Vice President of Global Governance, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary. She served in the Department of Justice during the George W. Bush administration and then as United States Associate Attorney General from 2017 to 2018. She's also served as a professor at the Antonin Scalia School of Law. Please welcome Rachel Brand. Thank you, Rachel. And next to me is Donna Brazile, a veteran political strategist, New York Times bestselling author, and Emmy and Peabody award-winning media contributor. She became the first African-American woman to serve as the manager of a major party's presidential campaign, running the campaign of former Vice President Al Gore. She previously served as interim chair of the Democratic National Committee and of the DNC's Voting Rights Institute. Please join me in welcoming Donna. Okay, we are going to jump right into this because we've got a short amount of time and a lot to learn from each of you. So I want to start by asking you each to just think about and consider how to convey to young people the importance of healthy conflict and robust debate. It's hard to change the styles of people at our age in life, old dogs and new tricks, I think. But we know that young people are much more interested in this work, and I think desperate for some good examples of how to do this the right way. Now, before I do that, I have to share just a couple things because I get to. Rachel recently gave an incredible commencement speech at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University. So you spoke movingly of the relationship between Justices Scalia and Ginsburg, despite their disagreements and their approaches. I'm not going to read sections of that, but everyone should go Google it. It's really impressive. I want to thank you for that. And then Professor Okediji, she gave an incredible lecture to your students at Harvard Law School that I watched as well, that I loved. You should also go and look at that. You said this: disagreement and division are not conjoined twins. They're not inevitable partners. It's true that disagreements are unavoidable. The art of disagreement is one of the skills you have to learn to preserve relationships. Healthy disagreement is a sign of healthy independence. It's part of life's journey, but the point of disagreement is not to be divided. So we're going to start with the two of you and then expand out. Rachel, let's start with you. Could you talk about why you chose to offer advice to young people and how young people can do this better, please?
Sure. Well, in that speech at the Scalia Law School, first of all, thank you for doing this. This is a really important project, and I'm really delighted to be a part of it. But I gave some advice on the both professional and personal fronts. So we were talking to lawyers, going out into the profession, and I talked about how you really cannot excel as a lawyer if you can't learn to listen to, understand, and grapple with opposing viewpoints. That's the entire ethos of our adversarial judicial system in the United States. So to be an excellent lawyer, you have to understand the other side's argument to make your own argument in the most persuasive and effective way. You can't go into the Supreme Court and only make arguments that you personally agree with. You have to convince them, and to convince them, you have to understand them. And that's, of course, not just true in law, it's true in any profession in which words and ideas matter. And so for young people coming up, you have to learn to do that. Here at the Cathedral, there's a great example of that. So my son goes to St. Albans, the boys' school here. St. Albans and NCS have a club that meets periodically after school, and they actually debate the issues of the day, including the hot-button political issues. And they're actually allowed to express viewpoints across the entire political spectrum, which is unfortunately rare. That is really important for an educational institution to do. It's a really important part of teaching kids to grow up into productive citizens. The other thing I talked about is just on the personal front. Your life is going to be a lot richer if you're willing to be friends with people who are not in the same spot as you are on the political spectrum. So I talked about some of my friends in law school, some of whom are here today, who are on the left. And my life is a lot richer because of them. And our relationship has nothing to do with politics. We don't have to talk about politics. We talk about everything else. That's what the relationship is about. Ruth, I'm on a board with Ruth, International Justice Mission. You should all go look it up. I'm very impressed with Ruth because of what I've seen of her in the boardroom, and I haven't the faintest idea what her politics are. I've never tried to look it up. She's never told me. I don't care. It's irrelevant to the work that we're doing together at IJM. And so I would say, while I really am on board with your project to get people to disagree better, as a way to sort of chip away at polarization, I would also say that if we can stop reducing everybody to a political being and just get to know people for who they are generically, that will also make a big difference.
Amen.
So thank you for doing this.
Love that. Yeah. Ruth, go ahead.
You know, until Rachel said that, it had never occurred to me that she even belonged to a political party. I think it's really important for us, and certainly our generation, you've made this point, that if we don't model what it means to love your enemies, to love your neighbors, to be your brother's keeper, your sister's keeper, that we are raising a generation that will not know anything but the current political moment as the norm. And that's a problem. We should all be concerned about that. You know, I teach at a law school, and Rachel went to a law school, where disagreement is real. When I speak to my students, I don't speak to them about covering their disagreements or even hiding who they are. But I tell them that their ability to honor the dignity of every person that they encounter requires them to develop the art of listening to what the other person has to say. You can't pretend to care about a person, to advocate for a cause, or to even think about the cause of justice unless you have actually heard and listened to and engaged with those with whom you may find points of agreement. You may find points of disagreement, but if you can't even begin the conversation, then you've already failed before you've even started. And this is an important lesson, I think, for us to not only teach and insist upon, but also to model. And so it's often the case that I will have students who will say, well, I don't want to be friends with this person. I don't want them to be my peer group because we don't believe in the same things. And so what I do in those circumstances, I ask them, well, how did you come to the point of believing? Because I think we are at this point now, and this is what we believe, but we forget that we didn't start at this point. That this process of whatever it is that your convictions are, whatever it is that your political biases are, you didn't start there. You were not born with that. And so learning to unwind and to ask, how did I get to believe the things that I believe today? Someone shared their ideas with me. Someone shared their thoughts with me. Someone challenged something that I believed, or someone just challenged me to think about believing differently. And so like Rachel, I think it's really important to emphasize the richness of our lives when we hear from one another. I quote to them all the time about iron sharpens iron. And when you teach in a competitive environment, anything that gets them to be better is always a win. And I encourage them that your best arguments come not from practicing or thinking or regurgitating the things that you already know and believe, but by hearing a perspective that you may be too blind to see. And that not only produces humility, which I think is key, but it also produces a capacity for compassion. And I think humility and compassion are essential to our capacity to improve and to really bring about a revival in our political system today.
Amen to all of that. Thank you. Yeah. Donna, Donna, could you answer that question, and then we'll go to Tim last.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. In fact, I learned that if I came to this church, it only costs $1 to light a candle, and I've been going to Catholic church, and it's $5. So y'all might see me more often. I put so much in the prayer thing that I stuffed the box. I pray for everybody. You know, I'm one of those Americans that when I get on my knees, I call it St. Mattress. I can't get up for several hours because I'm praying for everybody. So I've been involved in politics since the age of 9. It's a long time. And I started at the grassroots. And I've enjoyed every day of my life in American politics. I would not change one thing, including the color of my hair, because I've earned it. So don't talk about my age. I'm proud of it. Because to me, I try to tell my students, and I told them today, we're not going to have a democracy unless you participate, unless you're engaged, unless you want to help make it grow and expand it and believe in it. But the missing ingredients in American politics right now, the missing is trust. trust in one another, trust in our institutions, and the belief that we can still get through this. And when I say get through this, and I'm talking about all of it, from the soup to the gumbo. When I was coming up in politics, I had some flaws, a lot of flaws. That's why, you know, I'm Catholic. I stay in confession. And I used to think, because I was an athlete, that I had to beat my opponent. And as I've gotten older, I decided I need to learn from my opponent. Not just beat them, but learn from them. And I tell you, I'm so glad I learned that lesson, because throughout my life, I have fought great battles for civil rights and equal justice under the law. And in trying to make King's birthday a national holiday, which I had an opportunity to work on, we needed Ronald Reagan. I said, oh my God. But we did it. And in wanting with John Lewis and others to extend the Civil Rights Act of 1964, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we needed George Herbert Walker Bush and George Walker Bush. And I got to tell you, on that note, my greatest story of humility. It was the night that Hurricane Katrina made landfall on the Gulf Coast. And like many Louisianians and people from the Gulf, my family, they were dispersed, those who could afford to leave. It's at the end of the month, and most people understand at the end of the month, a lot of people don't have money to go anywhere. I mean, when you're working paycheck to paycheck and you're waiting for that eagle to land, Social Security, you know, VA, whatever, they couldn't leave. And so I found myself in a position where I knew people in the Bush administration. And rather than go on national TV, which I go on national TV and offer criticisms about the failure to get people off their roof or not rescue people or not provide them with water, I went on national TV and I basically said, Mr. President, how can I help you? And I had no idea that for over 3 years I would sit in Bush White House more than I had ever sat in Bill Clinton's White House. And I used to tell the president that I had a theme song from The Temptation, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. And so he gave me some Aretha when I was trying to give him Temptation. He said, I respect you. And I realized at that point that though Al Gore didn't make it by the 537 votes that didn't get counted in Florida, God had put me at that table for such a time. And for me, it was a time to tell people and remind them that I was one of those poor kids who grew up on the bayou, that every time it rained, we had waterfront property. I was a kid born at Charity Hospital that was no longer there, but I can ask the President of the United States to give us another hospital so that poor kids like me would have a place to come into this world. I was a kid who could go to President Bush and say, we need to fix the levees and rebuild the schools and bring people back home. And to this day, he calls me one of the most expensive dates that ever came through the White House. And I call him my president. On the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, I flew down to Louisiana on Air Force One. Yes, I have an ashtray and some matches. Okay? Don't worry, brother. They were available. They were more than one, so when there's more than one, I'm getting one. But President Obama said, are you coming with me? I said, yes, sir. I'm going to start the morning off with you in the 9th Ward in downtown, and then I'm going to welcome President and Mrs. Bush to my hometown. And they came. Nobody booed. We played the music. The president did his best dance. And I look forward, if God allows me, during the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina next year, to bring both my presidents back home, because we've made a lot of progress. And thank you, America, for helping us.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. Thank you. Good luck, Tim.
Are you kidding me?
Good luck,
Are you
Tim.
kidding me? I yield my time, Mr. Chairman, back to the gentlewoman from Louisiana. Okay, so this is the worst speaking position I've ever been in my entire life. Let me just start by, first of all, these comments are fantastic, but let me start by just recognizing again Governors Cox and Moore. You know, people say there's no political leadership in this country, and where are the leaders, and why don't we have anybody? And they're all missing in action. They're all a bunch of dogs. I think we saw it tonight that we have leaders in this country, and we have leaders in both parties, and they're ready to assume leadership positions and already doing so. So I want to thank you. I live in Maryland, so I'm a constituent of Governor Moore's, but I really spend most of my time working in Utah, so I feel like I work for Governor Cox as well, and what an honor tonight. And I thought it was so interesting that both of you grew up in families that had no politics. Not me. I mean, I had political buttons that held my clothes together. You know, I was asked what I should do, what I would do if I were president of the United States when I was 4 years old, and expected to answer with a coherent idea for what I could do to solve the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that. So I grew up in a very political context. It would never occur to me not to know the political party of other people. I mean, you two may not know, but I know. And I think to know and not to assume and not to judge and not to pigeonhole and not to demonize is another thing. I grew up in a political culture and climate that this culture is completely foreign to me. Doesn't look like the country I grew up in. But all three of my uncles who served in the United States Senate and one in the White House, it was almost intuitive, normal, natural that they would talk to their Republican colleagues, that they would dine and eat with their Republican colleagues, that they would have the kinds of experiences Donna just described with their Republican colleagues. We had Republicans in our house. Lowell Weicker was in our house. Mark Hatfield was in our house. Great Republicans over the many years that my dad visited to get the Office of Economic Opportunity legislation passed. Every single Republican congressperson on the Hill, every one of them, bar none, to try to get their votes. So it was intuitive to try to get legislation passed and try to get things done that you would try to build bipartisan. So the idea that we are hopeless in this moment, that this is an inevitable, incorrigible, unmanageable problem, it's a new and recent phenomenon. It is not inevitable. We have lived in many times when there have been great divisions in the country. We know that. But we have not necessarily lived in a time that had such great paralysis. So I just want to say that, you know, I learned many lessons as a kid. My dad was involved in starting the Peace Corps, which was a bridge building initiative between the United States, young people in the United States. And of course, many other legislative things that came through other members of my family. But the single most powerful influence on me was the influence my mother had in launching the Special Olympics movement. And even as a child at 3 and 4 years old, as I watched her in our backyard teaching children with intellectual disabilities who came from institutions, who were locked up, you know, who came with restraints, who came with aids, who came only with permission from governors sometimes to be allowed out. I realized very early on that there was a central issue in life, and that was that to treat people with contempt and fear was a problem. These people were all locked up for life because people were afraid of them, afraid of what they didn't understand and what they didn't know. And at a very early age, it struck me that that was an issue unto itself, the fear and the contempt that divides people from meeting, from understanding, from connecting, from playing as children, from learning as older children, and from living and working together as adults. That fear and contempt are an issue unto themselves. What I think we saw tonight with Governor Cox and Governor Moore was the emergence of a new issue on the political landscape. It's not just a means to an end any longer. It's not just a background noise question. It's not just, as Donna has just articulated in the context of the storms, it's not just a relationship issue. It's a new issue that is blocking the actual fabric of the country, stopping us from solving problems, dividing our families. You'll see data, Governor Cox, in a few days. Over 30% of Americans have ended a relationship in their own family as a function of political contempt and demonization. It's not that they disagree. It's that they demonize the person they disagree with. So, our small team, our Utah-based small team, following in your footsteps, Governor, has been working to look at what would it take to take the people who are doing the demonizing. Guess who they are? I'm sorry to say, a lot of them are in the media and in politics and the algorithm. Those are the three primary force fields that children will say, yeah. We asked children, I did a focus group with children not too long ago talking about bullying. Everybody wants to stop bullying kids. And kids kept saying to me, well, no, we don't have bullies in this school. And I said, well, what about the name calling? And well, it's not so bad in our school. And I pushed and I said, you keep asking us about bullying. The seventh grader said to me, the adults are the bullies. It's not us. So we ask about children. Children are actually turned off by this for most of their childhood, and when they get to college, they start to think, well, maybe I have to do this to get along, because they see the adults getting famous, getting tweets, what do you call it, Kathleen, likes, clicks. You get famous, you get powerful, and you get rich with contempt. That's what they think. And where did they learn that? They did not learn it from fourth grade, 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds. They learned it from us. So our challenge was to say, well, what would it take to actually invite political figures to change? And we talked to a bunch of folks, including learning from you, Governor, and we developed this idea that we should score politicians based on how they perform on a scale of hatred in the characterization of their opponent up to dignity. It's a 1 to 8 scale, which we piloted in the state of Utah, and we taught students how to use it. And they started to look at this and, okay, well, if I'm better than you, maybe that scores about a 4 or a 3. But if you're evil, that scores about a 2. And then if I say you're evil and you deserve to be destroyed, that's a 1. That's war language. That's the language of violence. Now, if you think about how you characterize the other party, we know which one that is for Spencer. We don't know the rest of these people. But most Americans today think that they have to score the other party as evil. That's the way we think about it. That's a hair's breadth above violence. So don't be surprised when you talk about the other people being evil. Don't be surprised that some people hear that as a call to violence, because it is. So we've got this situation where, I just go back very briefly to this index, the dignity index. What we found is, we said, well, now you can score Governor Cox, you can score Senator Lee, or the candidate McMullen, you can score the congressional. And the kids said to us, we want to use this for ourselves. We actually want to change the way we characterize other people. I had a student say in a classroom, when I was a college student, I was showing them the index, and a student raised her hand. She said, yesterday I posted that this person I'm no longer talking to is a swear word. I'm not going to say that in here. A blank, a lot of letters, word. And she said, I'm going to take it down when class is over. I don't want to be at that level. I don't want to use contempt. So our view here is that we have to get really practical here and not just wax eloquent about what it will take to have us think and feel and even pray differently, God willing, and remind us of our own scriptures and all of our traditions that tell us that hatred is not where we want to land. Let's put it broad. But invite us to be very practical in learning how to incentivize the people in political life, like Cox, like Moore, and reward them. And if I dare say, remind those who are not scoring well in the dignity index or in other measures of speech, remind them that we will not reward them with our votes and our clicks and our money. Until we create a counter incentive, and the simple premise, I'll just bring it back to the Special Olympics experience because it's so powerful for me. The simple premise of the Special Olympics movement is that you don't have to be the fastest, you don't have to be the strongest, the smartest, right? You get to that starting line and you run your race with every ounce of energy God gave you, and you deserve the dignity that you were born with, right? You didn't earn it by coming here. You didn't earn it because I hugged you or gave you a medal. You were born with that dignity. And when Americans start to remind themselves that that is a fundamental American value, maybe de Tocqueville taught it, but we haven't got there yet. And we didn't have it in 1830, and we didn't have it in 1860, and we didn't have it in 1960, and we don't have it now. But we could get there. And we could create a movement that incentivizes people to want to go there, not because they're going to get punished, but because they actually prefer to live in relationships where no matter how difficult the tension and the issues is, they can look the other person in the eye and know that that person is a child of God and treat them that way too.
Amen. Thank you.
That was church.
He just took us to church, literally and figuratively. Okay, ladies and gentlemen.
There's a cheap candle. There's a cheap candle. I got a Catholic church for you, by the way, that has $1 candles.
Okay, so they gave us 30 minutes, and we've taken 29 of them. So here's what we're going to do. We talked about the Dignity Index. So I'm going to ask the three of you a 1 minute. You get 1 minute each, okay? And Ruth, we're going to start with you, okay, Professor Okediji. Institutions are really important. Faith-based institutions are important. We're losing faith-based institutions. People are leaving church at rates we've never seen before. Can you just talk about how important faith is in this work, and if not faith, then what, in 1 minute?
Wow, I know, thanks. So let me just say that, to your point, if we don't encourage and teach and preach and pray and speak about the strength of institutions that can be gathering places for us, that we leave this generation and ourselves with nothing but the contempt and the hate. In other words, contempt and hate itself has become idols. They're places where people every day bow and worship. That's why the clicks are there, the likes and the tweets and the followers. And if we don't begin to say there is a better way, there's a different way, there's a place and a way of living that does not require you to debase yourself or your neighbor. These institutions are important, vitally important, because they give us hope. And Donna talked about no trust. I'm going to say there's no hope. And if we have a hopeless generation, we will have a generation and a culture that feeds only on distrust and hate. We cannot afford that.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Rachel, most of the criticism I get for this work is, how dare you tell me I should engage with those people? Those people who I disagree with, who I hate, who hate me, whatever. What would you say, why is it important that we engage with people who are different than us, with those people?
You know, I've found that over the years that if I listen to people and try to understand why they think what they do, I don't think that their views are as offensive at the end of that exercise as I thought at the beginning of it, because even if I hold and I've had this experience a number of times, I'm going into a conversation about a very contentious issue, I'm just internally rolling my eyes. I know that everything that's going to be said and on the other side is going to be, offensive or whatever, and then I start to listen, and I come out of it and I realize that there's a whole lot more nuance in the issue than I thought there was going in. And even though I come out of it still holding the same basic view, my fundamental view is still the same, there's a lot more nuance and there's a lot more grace because I understand where those people are coming from. Those people, I see where they're coming from, and I can love them a little bit even if I still really disagree with their fundamental premise. So it just takes some listening and open to being to the nuance.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Donna. But by the way, I'm hearing words like nuance and hope and trust. I mean, this is just, our souls need this. Our collective souls need this so much. Donna, I get to confess too. We don't do it as much as Mormons, but we still do it a little bit, okay? So my confession is this. I grew up as a Republican. I grew up watching you on TV and as a Democrat. And there were so many times that I thought, I would love to just argue with her. And I finally get up here on stage, and I finally get to meet you, and I love you, and I'm so impressed by you, and I want to thank you for bringing so much light to this discussion and to this world. My question for you: you've been a part of the machine. You've talked about this a little bit, right? The electoral machine, the political industrial complex, as I refer to it sometimes. And again, I'm in it. You've been in it. Tim's family's been in it. We know that. But there is a belief now amongst so many politicians that the only way to win is to destroy your opponent. That's it. It's just negative, tear down, scorched earth campaigning. Am I naive to believe that there's a different way and a better way? And can you give us some light and hope to take us home?
Absolutely. Look, there are so many examples of political leaders across the country that are not just gaining the support of Democrats or Republicans, but remember, we're both minority parties, the duopoly. We don't represent the majority. The majority of voters are unaffiliated. They don't want anything to do with us. The problem is the system that we have in place do not allow them to actually make choices until the general election in most states. So we got to find ways to get the unaffiliated voters back into the sauce. We got to make sure that they're able to help us make big decisions with regards to the primaries. Or if we want to change the system, there are so many different systems out there, jumbo primary, ranked choice voting, that might give more people an opportunity to serve. I think the other critical shortage we have is, we need more candidates. We need more people willing to step up and run for office. So I want to, you know what I tell my students? Why you? Because there's no one better. Why now? Because tomorrow's not soon enough. And I'll end with scripture, because I know the real preachers are coming. But since I'm a Catholic woman and I can't always go to church and give it all I have, I'm going to just say, I remember my grandmother used to call us in order of our birth. Cheryl, Sheila, Donna, Tater, Chet, Lisa, Demetri, Kevin, Ziola. I tell you, we were Catholic. And she would always find something from the Bible to give us hope. My parents were always working late, working the second job or the third job. And I think the book of Galatians, chapter 6, verses 9. Do not grow weary in doing good, for in due season you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. I am never going to give up on America. I am never going to give up on community. I'm never going to give up on our ability to transform and to make progress. This is, as chair of the J.W. Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board, I get a chance to read applications from students and scholars all over this globe, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. I chose that region after doing Europe and South America, and when you read these letters, these applications of why they want to come to America, it makes me want to run to the hilltop and say, you should see why they want to go to Massachusetts or go down to Georgia, because they believe in this idea, this notion that we are free people and that we can and we will represent and lead ourselves. So, America, don't give up. Our best days are ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, Donna, Rachel, Ruth, and Tim, thank you so much.
I'm David McAllister Wilson, president of Wesley Theological Seminary, and I'm here to tell you you should be very afraid. The preachers are the last to speak. We have a very distinguished panel, and you see in front of you the description of these two gentlemen. And I'll let you read that so that we can just jump right into our conversation. But I will say that both Peter Wehner and Joshua DuBois are frequent media commentators on a variety of topics, and especially are prominent voices of faith in the public square. From the beginning, we envisioned this effort to be here in this wonderful cathedral. And we call for similar efforts to be hosted in other houses of worship around the country this election year. Pete and Joshua, this space reminds me you worked for presidents who were very different from one another, but who both spoke at critical moments in the language of faith to foster healing and unity. Each called forth the better angels of our national being. I remember when President Bush spoke here 3 days after 9/11. And in the days after, he was very careful to avoid demonizing Muslims. And then I remember standing on this very spot and presenting Clemente Pinckney his doctoral diploma posthumously to his widow after he and a number of his church members were assassinated, and how President Obama broke into singing Amazing Grace at Clemente's memorial service in Charleston. Both presidents offered grace. They demonstrated grace as they played the spiritual role of civic leaders. And I'd like the two of you to talk about the civic role of spiritual leaders out of your experience. How can clergy and congregations step forward this year in particular to repair the breaches without compromising their beliefs?
Well, thank you, David, and Pete, so good to be with you. God bless the memory of Reverend Pinckney, and God continue to bless his wife, Jennifer, and their two beautiful girls. I had the honor of working, as you know, with President Obama on his speech, and then I actually went to the funeral services with my parents who are here today. We sat a few rows behind the family, and I have to tell you, David, it was such a strange feeling to watch the President of the United States give a speech, really a sermon, in front of the casket of a murdered man. It was just so odd. And it was almost as if the most complicated and tragic parts of our common collective national story had just sort of reared their ugly heads and choked the life out of him and those other beautiful souls. And just the most difficult parts of our story, and in some ways the most beautiful, came together in that moment. And the most radical thing I think President Obama could have said in that moment is what he said, and he got a lot of support, but some criticism for it too. And it was that we all need to give and receive grace. And we need it because at the root of, and this will get to your question about what faith leaders can do, at the root of so many of the challenges that so many speakers have so beautifully described today are people who are hurting and who are broken and who are seeking meaning in their lives, right? And it's, perhaps a radical thing to say that the people who descended upon the Capitol building on January 6th a couple years ago, yes, they are angry, and yes, they did things that require consequences, but they were also trying to fill a hole, right, in their souls with some level of meaning. The same meaning that people on the left who cancel people in the public square and are just, maybe rail on Twitter or elsewhere, they're trying to scoop meaning into this hole, this abyss. And they're doing so by demonizing someone else, by othering other people, and sometimes it becomes more acute, and sometimes it even becomes violent, and it literally kills people because they're seeking meaning. So what can faith leaders do? They can preach the fact and share the fact and teach the fact that the places that too many of us are building meaning are sinking sand.
Yes.
And they can talk about where true meaning is found. And that doesn't have to be some bland message, some generic message. They can call out and name the idols that people are replacing true meaning with, and then call people into something that's more lasting and eternal. And so that's what I think faith leaders can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was lovely, and thanks all of you for coming out. Sometimes you need people to light candles instead of curse the darkness. I think this is an evening of lighting candles. It struck me also with the two governors that were here. There's a line in philosophy that you can prove the actual by the possible, and what we saw tonight was the possible, which is people of different parties to engage with each other with respect and have real affection, and I think that matters. In terms of what faith leaders and faith communities can do, and I'm a person of faith, so I would be speaking sort of within my tribe and my subculture. I guess I would say the first thing that it ought to do is do no harm, because I actually think that far too many people of faith are using the position of faith and using a scripture to wound the country and to wound other people. That shouldn't be how it is, and that wasn't the model of Jesus, but that's how it's playing itself out. So I think the first thing to do would be to stop inflicting the wounds and to being some of the engines of antipathy. Beyond that, I think that leaders of faith and communities of faith really do have to attend to their own communities. I mean, before they think about what they can do politically, they should think about what can we do with the people and the institutions to which we have the greatest sway and the greatest control over, and those would be churches and congregations. One is, I think, that they really could model what community is. I have a theory. I haven't tested it exactly, but I think one of the reasons that our politics is so angry and ugly is there are a lot of wounded people out there, and those wounds are playing themselves out in all sorts of stages, including the political stage. And one of the purposes of churches, religious institutions, mosques, and synagogues is to heal wounded people. It's to lean into life. It's to know the story of the people, of what they're going through, of pain and sorrow and loss and grief and joy and celebration. And the second thing is that politics today has the feel to me of almost a religious zealotry to it. And I wonder if in some respects people aren't finding homes within faith communities. But we all need homes. We all are drawn to sort of tribes. We all need people that help shape us and form us. And I think if churches were to do that and were able to give purpose to people, then the tribalism that I think defines politics so much today would be mitigated. A second thing that I really do wish, and I want to touch on something that Donna said. She had a really lovely line where when she got into politics, that she thought about defeating her opponents, but now she thinks more about what she could have learned from her opponents. And that had a lot of resonance with me. Because when you think about debate, the most obvious thing I think that we would all agree with is a certain degree of civility, that you wouldn't dehumanize the other person, the imago Dei, that everybody is created in the image of God. And somebody earlier talked about once you begin to listen well to people and learn their stories, you may not agree with them, but you can at least get to understand them better. So I think that is part of what faith leaders could model, which is, how should you deal with debate? But beyond that is, I think, in a way, a deeper point, which is how to think about debate. And I'll just tell you one story, which has been meaningful to me, and it's in C.S. Lewis's Surprised by Joy. And about halfway through, he's describing what he calls first friends and second friends. And he said, your first friend is the person who's your alter ego. That's the person where you start the sentence and the other person can complete it. And we all need those people in our lives. For Lewis, it was a person named Arthur Graves, whom he knew since he was a child. He said, the second friend is not your alter ego, but your anti-self. That's the person that reads all the same books that you do because you have common interests, but draws all the wrong conclusions from those books. But the interesting thing was Lewis and Barfield, they were very close friends. Lewis, I think his first book was dedicated to Barfield. He said, he was my first and greatest teacher. They're part of the Inklings, literary group in England in the middle part of the century. And they had very intense, somewhat esoteric debates, Barfield and Lewis. And Lewis described in Surprised by Joy, he said, Barfield and I would go at it hammer and tong, late into the night, arguing with each other, sort of feeling the weight of the blows of the other, slowly absorbing what the other was saying. But sort of the punchline of the story is that they both treasured each other precisely because they saw the world differently and because they learned from each other. And Barfield later said, Lewis and I never debated for victory, we debated for truth. And the difference between debating for victory and debating for truth is all the difference in the world. Because you're asking another person to enter into your world and help you see your own blind spots, recalibrate your thoughts and how you see the world. And so I think there's so many ways in which, again, as a person of the Christian faith, if we model certain ways of conduct. Last thing I'll say about this is Eugene Peterson, a theologian and pastor, he talked about the Jesus truth and the Jesus way. And he said you can't pry them apart. Too many people, I think, are advocating what they think is the Jesus truth, and it comes at the expense of the Jesus way. Yeah. And when it comes at the expense of the Jesus way, that's when you dehumanize people. That's when you say it's a means to an end. And we need our faith leaders to sort of give voice to that and model it and become a healing force in a bitterly divided society.
So what does that mean for what pastors should do from that thing up there, the pulpit? And that is, does civility mean we're just careful to avoid everything that might offend some faction in the church? What does that mean for the stance of preachers?
In fact, quite the opposite. I think we have to have an active and vocal and lived civility that pushes back against incivility in very specific and public ways. This is going to be a deeply uncivil year, and that does not require people to be quiet. But when you see something that you know is ripping apart the fabric of this country, we have to say something about that. You have to say something about that. This is not, I think that the challenge is that we come to forums like this and we care about civility, and that means that we are often thoughtful people who don't want to offend. But we've got to find that sweet spot where you can still speak lovingly but prophetically when you see something that you just know in your gut is wrong, right? This is what King did. He wasn't quiet. In fact, one of his biggest criticisms was reserved not for the most virulent racists and the people who were, spraying the water hoses and so forth, but it was for apologies for putting the fine point that he put on it. But as he said in the letter from the Birmingham jail, it was reserved for the white moderates who was so concerned with decorum and civility that they refused to speak out when they knew something was wrong. And so I think what we have to do, what preachers and what all of us have to do, especially this year on both sides of the aisle, is when you know in your gut that something is just wrong, you have to say it. You got to put it out there. You got to, but to do so, in my tradition, seasoned with salt and full of the Holy Spirit and with as much love as possible, but still speaking to it. I think we need an active, a lived civility that is not quiet, that doesn't take a back seat, but leans in to the healing of this country.
And maybe somehow avoids, Tim warned us about demonizing, and you spoke of antipathy.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. You know, in terms of what pastors should do from the pulpit, I mean, you just have to leave that to some extent to individual pastors and what their congregations are. I think the way that I view this, I'll mention that, and then I want to touch on what I thought was Joshua's very important point about how to understand civility, which is well, let me first actually talk about that, because I think that the confusion that there is with civility is that it is synonymous with lack of conviction, that it's devoid of principles, and it's always backing down. I really don't think that that is what civility means. I think what the civility means is that you carry yourself in a certain way, that you don't engage in ad hominem attacks, you don't engage in the dehumanizing rhetoric, and you do try and listen to people's story and appreciate where they come from. But you can't give up on justice at the altar of civility. And you certainly can't, as a person of religious faith, do that, because one of the central concepts, I would say, of the Hebrew Scripture and the New Testament is justice itself. And some of the great figures are people of justice. So I think, for example, with pastors, I'm not necessarily think that they should get in. In fact, I don't think they should get in and endorse, candidates and weigh into partisan politics. That's a problem for all sorts of reasons. But I do think that you can, and they can, give voice to justice and let people in terms of their conscience work out what they mean. Just to name three figures, two in American history, which are models for me, and one who's not. One of them Joshua mentioned, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Stephen Carter, who was a professor at Yale, said that the great contribution of King wasn't that he articulated the pain of the oppressed. He said a lot of pastors and others did that. So the great gift of King was that he has inspired his followers to display civility and love while they were in dissent. And I think that's the balance. The other figure to me in American history who's a kind of model for this is Lincoln, he was, Lord Charnwood wrote what I think is the best biography. It was written in 1917. And he described Lincoln, said this most unrelenting enemy of the project of the Confederacy was the one man who had purged his heart and mind from hatred and even anger toward his fellow countrymen of the South. And of course, Lincoln's words live on, including for this program, right? 5 weeks before Fort Sumter, he said, "We're not enemies, we're friends." And after the Civil War, what did he say? "With charity toward all, with malice toward none." And then Jesus. Each of those figures were polarizing figures. The question with polarization is polarization for what end? Is it polarization for injustice? Is it polarization for its own sake? Or is it polarization for justice? And you can't conflate all those together, but it's always with a sense of how do you carry yourself in those fights for justice. And it's not easy. I mean, I know how hard this is. you care about a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Your emotions get inflamed. You get frustrated with people. Sometimes you feel like you just want to shake them by the shoulders and say, don't you see what you're doing? So I'm not immune to that, but we need people in our life, and we need cornerstones in our life that can draw us back to that balance. And thankfully, we have those models.
I think about the presidents you two have worked for and how rhetoric is so important. I mean, I think about what you were saying, and that we're aiming for something simultaneous, a kinder, gentler, and more just nation. I think, for instance, one of the big debates today, the words of President G.W. was, family values don't end at the border. Just those simple formulations that try to find that way through.
Yeah, simple formulations like that, like the fact that we are all struggling through this thing called life together and trying to navigate our way through. That we're all fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. It's those simple truths.
Yeah, no, I just, I'm a speechwriter, and so I've had this fondness for words since I was a kid. But I think everybody knows in their own lives the power of words. They may be speeches, but you know the power of words in song lyrics. You know the power of words from a letter from a loved one. You know the power of words from a poem. You know the power of words from a book. So words have this enormous capacity to both describe the human experience and the deepest things of the human experience. And once in a while, if you get the words just right, there's sort of a portal to something else, to something even at the edge of sort of transcendence. And it's not just words that do that. Music does it, nature does it, art does it, architecture does it. We're human beings have this longing, I think, for transcendence. And none of us ever get there. But there are ways in which we can help each other along the journey. And I think when we can see things in their fuller selves, that begins the reshaping of the sensibilities and the dispositions, because I really do think that at the core of the political divisions, it's not issues, it's sensibilities, it's dispositions, it's core identity. And, what are churches and pastors and religious leaders supposed to do? They shape souls.
They shape souls, yeah.
And we need some soul shaping.
Yeah. And maybe we need more of it than we're getting from our pastors.
David, Pete and I have decided to close this with a little something different. There's been a little too much agreement today. So we're going to physically duke it out, if that's okay with you all. We're just going to, may the best man win. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. And you'll see betting slips on your chairs. You can place bets at who wins that.
I was wondering why he didn't have his tie on.
That's right. I had to be prepared.
Well, you held it together for a long time. That was really good. In fact, it makes me think of what this looks like, this thing we're talking about. And one of the things it looks like is what we've seen tonight. Mm-hmm. But I think of another moment, and Pete, you mentioned this moment in a piece in the Atlantic Monthly, and it was at the Grammys, when Tracy Chapman and Luke Combs sang a duet of her song Fast Cars.
Yeah.
And maybe the way to close our session, rather than the two of you duke it out.
I will not be singing Fast Car up here for anyone.
Exactly.
Just want to be clear about that. But what was cool about that was Tracy Chapman and Luke Combs, but it was also the beautiful deference that Luke gave to center this brilliant artist, Tracy, but still support. It was the two of them weaving that together in such a beautiful way.
It really was, and the way they looked at each other.
Yeah.
And maybe the phrase I'll use is not a scripture phrase to close, but a phrase from that song, which is, maybe together we can get somewhere.
Just maybe.
Just maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Great to be with you, man. That was awesome. Thank you.
Friends, would you join me in thanking all of our speakers tonight for all that they gave us, all of the gifts. And if you'll permit me, I will leave us tonight with the words of Jesus. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. For the measure you receive, for the measure you give will be the measure that you receive. Thank you, everyone, and good night.